Ever wondered how to turn a small residential lot into a gold mine? Joining us on today's episode is John Rourke, a local real estate investor, developer, and neighborhood infill expert. He is going to be sharing with us some new strategies and techniques you can use to turn small properties into massive wealth opportunities. Hello, and welcome back to the Happy House Hacking Podcast, the podcast designed to help young people in California navigate the path to happy home ownership. I am your host, Owen Schwagerly. I am a realtor, investor, and happy house hacker. And on today's episode, we are going to have a conversation with John Rourke, and he's going to share with us more about building ADUs, developing small properties, and doing urban infill development. So, John, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into real estate development.
Yeah, I started back 2004 probably. And I just started watching all those shows where they were flipping homes and like, I can do that. And so I started with a flipper, just bought a house, fixed it up, sold it in, I think 6 months and made about $80,000 back then and got hooked from there. And so with that money, I bought a lot and built a new house on it, bought a rental, and then just kept, moving into different things. And, back then, prior to the downturn, I was doing mostly infill. Occasionally, I would do new build and was looking for a lot of different kind of subdivision opportunities. And but back then, yet we didn't have the opportunities we have now. And so even though interest rates are higher now, there's a lot more opportunity to create equity, using, the ADU and SB9.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about infill. Like, what does infill development even mean? Yeah.
So generally you're used to seeing a new housing development. It's usually just on the outside of town. It's they annex new land and that becomes part of the city. And so the problem with that, it usually takes 10 years to get something like that done. You got to do a bunch of infrastructure. And so there's been a focus on more infill now, building more housing within neighborhoods, building denser, taking single family and, creating duplexes, creating the opportunity for fourplexes. So infill development would be anything that's within the city. And, they I think a word they use a lot is missing middle, that there should be more housing kind of in the middle where we've, in the past just done single family housing.
Okay. And so what are you focusing on now mostly when you're looking at real estate investing or developing? What are you really excited about these days?
Yeah, I primarily do San Luis Obispo and I prefer college rental. So I stay pretty close to campus, but occasionally I'll be given something that's, a good opportunity. But most of the stuff I'm looking for right now is properties with the potential of adding ADUs.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe subdivision, but mostly ADU.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I know I've learned a lot from our conversations over the years, going out to lunch and talking about doing real estate. And even this house we bought here was partially an inspiration from our conversation, doing the ADU on our garage, converting that, and then having another part of the house rented out. And so urban infill, it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Because the garage is already there. You've already got it walled in. You just have to build it out, frame it, put in the plumbing, and then boom, you've got a unit right there.
Yeah. In the past, they've called that your garage is unconditioned space and the house you live in is conditioned space. So, but they, that unconditioned space was generally built to the same guidelines as housing that you're living in. So all you have to do is make it habitable by, adding insulation, adding drywall, making sure your windows are energy efficient, heating and cooling, cooking. And it's, half the work's done for you because you've already got a foundation, you've already got a roof, you've already got your framing, you've already got your exterior. So it's just natural to take that house for your car and make it a house for people.
Mm-hmm. So when you're looking at property, what do you look for that would make it a good deal versus a bad deal?
Yeah, the more room you have, the better. If you're looking to build an ADU separate from your garage, which a lot of people want to keep their garage, you're looking for space. I like corner lots, especially for SB9 subdivision. Corner lots work better for that because if you build a new house, you can put one facing one street and the existing house is facing the other. So I really like corner lots. I really like single family zonings because SB9 only works in single family zoning. Oh yeah, what else? That's pretty much it. In San Luis, everything's usually 6,000 square foot or more. So the larger the better. The more room you have to build and create some separation between the houses. Is good.
Can you explain a little bit about what SB9 is and maybe some of the ADU laws and like why this change is so significant?
Yeah, so ADU was, I think, the first real step in trying to create more housing quicker in California. And the main thought with ADU is, hey, let's just give people the ability to build another house on their property. And I think that's going to really make a dent in the, we're short 3.5 million houses in California right now. So ADU, I think, is going to be the most effective way to make a dent in that. SB9 takes it a little bit further. ADU law basically said you can have two houses on a lot. SB9 said, okay, if you've got a single family zoning, lot, you can build another house. And then each one of those houses can have an ADU. So with SB9, you can actually end up with 4 separate units on one property. And if it's done right, it really isn't that noticeable. I mean, it's definitely different from what you see right now, but it's not something that, somebody who just moved to the neighborhood would notice a huge difference between one house and 4 houses, because generally those houses are smaller too. Like you've got some houses that are brand new, built 3,000 square foot, and you got a family of 5, maybe 6 in there. If you take an older 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom house and add an ADU and maybe add another house and an ADU, I mean, obviously there's more people in that, but maybe it's only twice as much. Parking is usually what people worry about, but I think we have to have the conversation about housing before we have the conversation about parking.
Yeah,
we need to house people, not cars.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. It's a great point.
Yeah.
And most people's garages are filled with junk anyway.
Yeah, most people, especially our age.
Right.
I've never used my garage for a car. You've got older people. I've seen who actually park their cars in the garage, and that's their thing. But I've never done it.
Yeah. We had a lot of, it felt like pushback just from our neighbors. It seemed like they weren't super thrilled. We were building an ADU, and, as young people, we're trying to figure out a way to make it work.
Yeah.
How can you afford to buy in California on the Central Coast? Yeah. It's like overwhelming at times.
Yeah.
And buying something with a little bit of rental income is just, it's the way for young people.
It's really the only way. And there's conversations about how we've gotten to this point, because obviously the people who are upset by you densifying your property have been here a while, and they had the opportunity to buy the same house that you're paying $1 million for $100,000. And, back then that was still a lot of money. But I think proportionately it's less achievable for young people than it was for them when they bought their house. And you can make an argument that those, particular people are generally the ones who prevent more housing from happening. They're usually the most vocal when it comes to more housing being built in their city. And California has, had a hard time meeting the numbers, or the housing numbers that we need because of the pushback of, older people, worried about their property values and, saying that it's not good for the neighborhood, but, they're the same people that are having the children, having the grandchildren, and where do they want those people to live? We need to build housing. We need to, otherwise they can't live in California. Everywhere else it's a little bit easier to build housing.
Right. So as a young person, like what would you say would be the best strategy or best way for a young person who's on the sidelines thinking about real estate? I want to do it, but new construction, new development, SB9, that seems like way over my head. That's kind of like unattainable. Like, what should I do? Like, should I start there or where should I go to start?
Yeah, I've had a few people ask me, like, how do I just get in? How do I do it? And, obviously there's ways you can do it where, are a little unconventional. You could buy a house with a friend and have the plan of splitting the house, and having, or building the ADU or splitting the lot, so you can do the commune style where, several people get together to try to create some equity. A really good way to go is family. There's a lot of, young people whose parents are living in 3,000 square foot homes, and they don't need to be in 3,000 square foot homes. So, they can try to convince them to have a house together. Somebody stays in the ADU, somebody stays in the house, or you build two houses. But that's a good way to start. But another thing I always tell people, don't buy the nicest house. Like everybody wants to move into a house that's done. But yeah, that's going to be the hardest thing to afford. And, I really encourage people to build equity, buy something that needs some work, watch some YouTube videos. It's really easy to fix up a house. Do the ADU. I tell people, if you can get a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom house with a 2-car garage, in San Luis, you're lucky if you find that for $700,000 to $800,000. It happens. But that's a great start. And I mean, just converting that garage and getting that rent, between $1,500 and $2,000, depending on what you do, that creates, a couple $100,000 in equity right there. And then I don't know if you've talked on your podcasts about the live in it for 2 years and get the money tax-free, the gain.
No, share with us about the strategy.
So let's say you guys bought a house, $700,000 and you fixed up or did an ADU in the garage, fixed up the house. If you live in that house for 2 years and then sell it, and let's say, it went up in value $300,000, that $300,000 is tax-free if you live in it for 2 years. And that's actually, it's $250,000 tax-free if you're single, up to $500,000 tax-free if you're married. And so there are people that's all they do. They buy houses, live in them for 2 years, create that equity, get their tax-free money, and then upgrade to a new house. And so doing the ADU is a good way to kind of help facilitate that. I know if you do have a rental, they kind of treat a portion of, so let's say you converted your garage. That garage is, let's say, 1/3 of your house by square footage. If you're renting that out, that portion isn't occupied by you. And so let's say you created $500,000 equity and you're married and at 2 years you sold. If 1/3 of the property was a rental, then that 500 gets reduced by that 1/3. Now, what I don't know, I think you might be able to 1031 that portion into something else.
Oh, wow.
So that's where it gets a little confusing.
That's cool.
I'm probably going down a rabbit hole we don't need to go down. Just start with getting a house, creating some equity. And then I really like I tell people, because there's a lot of people that want their forever home right now. And that's just too hard to do. You really want to try to just get into something, get into anything. And I would, really recommend just getting into something that you can just create that equity in. So
totally,
2-car garage, is a great way to start.
Yeah,
with a 2-car garage.
That's awesome. And another thing on that note is if you buy a house and you owner occupy and you rent out a portion of it, they'll take that percentage and you can actually write off a lot of the costs of ownership.
Yeah.
So for this place, it was 2,400 square feet. We're renting out 900 square feet. So that's considered a rental. Yep. And then we built the ADU in the garage. That's another 400 square feet. So now we're at like 1,350 or 1,400 square feet out of the total amount on this house, which we can then write off.
Oh, yeah.
Things like the power or all the extra write-offs that you get for tax saving purposes.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah. It's definitely set up for an advantage for investment. And luckily, real estate is an investment. Most of the tax advantages out there were set up for stock investors, but luckily, real estate investors get that same benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what are some of the greatest challenges that you've faced while doing these development projects?
Yeah, it's a lot of times it's the city kind of figuring out, how to enforce the new laws. The city of San Luis Obispo has done a great job at picking up ADU. Like at first, it was slow going at first, but I think they've done a really good job at making ADUs easy to do. And they're still learning. We kind of learn together. They'll tell us we can't do something. We read something different from the state, and we go back and forth a little bit. Sometimes we get an interpretation from the state, but the city's pretty good about once the state says no, this is the way. They go, okay, we'll start doing that. So they've been really good about the ADU, the SB9. It's been about 2 years. They're definitely getting better. We've helped people do. I think 3 of them successfully. We're working on another 4, but they're definitely a little bit harder. ADU is kind of a no-brainer. The city's, into those. They support those. The SB9, I think there's a little bit more pushback, but they're getting better. I think that one's going to be a good one.
Yeah, you're kind of like a pioneer on this whole front because SB9 is so new, the city doesn't even know what to do with it.
Yeah.
So how have you navigated through that process?
It was hard at first. The first time we put an application in, we had to go in 3 times, and every time they're like, get us this, give us this. And the third time I went in there, I said, you guys just have to take this in. Just take my money and start your process. Because you guys can't just keep pushing me away. Let's start this. And I mean, the process, in my opinion, should take 6 months. And the first one took about 2 years.
Wow.
And it was just, they wanted, I don't know that they wanted to figure it out, but they're busy too. I always kind of give them credit at the end where, I don't necessarily agree with some of the things they do or the decisions they make, but I always appreciate that they do it. We need somebody making those decisions, and they're always good. Sometimes it takes longer, but like I said, I mean, it's been 2 years. It took 2 years to get the first one through, or just under 2 years to get the first one through. And they're definitely better at them now. And so I think that's what really helps the city is when there's precedent, when they can go, oh, this is how we did it in the past. And so kind of going in first was a little hard, but it's definitely, I've talked to other people who are using it now, and it's definitely becoming more common.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if you look back at your real estate investing journey and career, do you have any things that you look back and say, oh man, I wish I didn't do that?
Oh man. Not as far as didn't do it. People always ask me, do you wish you kept everything? And I always say no, because then I couldn't buy the next thing. It's always a process for me to get into the next one. I can't think of anything that, I wish I hadn't done. I mean, we always go, oh, we could have done better if we did this. But, and it's funny when I look at, I looked at some pictures of the first flipper I did and went, oh man, I can't believe I would pick those materials, and 20 years later, you look at it and go, we're pretty much remodeling every 10 years. I think most people want something new every 10 years, but yeah, I can't think of anything where I wish I had done something, completely different. There's always oh, I made a mistake here, but nothing where it's it was life-changing. If I would have done this, it would have been way better.
Mm-hmm.
I always think of, what if I bought Bitcoin the first time I read about Bitcoin?
Right.
What was that, 2009 or something? But real estate, it's always if there's a good opportunity, you buy it, you fix it up, you live in it, and then when another opportunity comes up, you decide if you still want that opportunity. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you look back and go, oh, I should have done this. But, it's always, I think it's always part of the learning process.
Mm-hmm. Can you share any success stories you have of people you've seen or helped out with SB9 or ADUs?
Yeah. So I've got several friends who can afford housing now because, we helped them create an ADU, and that, ADU helps supplement their income enough where they can afford to live. We've helped some friends build housing on, a property I have that we're working on subdivision. But I can think of several people who we've built a house or helped them add an ADU to their property. And that's just that little extra. We had a friend who was, I think their monthly payment was about $4,700 a month, which, they were able to do that. But then they got a divorce, and the wife wasn't sure she'd be able to afford, something like that again. And so I helped her. We had just happened to be building a house that could easily have a JADU, an 80, a smaller ADU. And I said, I think we can, create, this house, make it a little bit smaller, give you a rental unit, and we should be able to sell it to you for about, what you need it to be, your monthly payment to be with that rent. And so she was able to live in this house, making a little bit less, or I guess combined a little bit less. She was still making the same, and was able to, afford a new house based on the help coming in. And the help coming, she actually rents it fair, like she's, 15 to 1,600. And by keeping that kind of rent low it's a 1-bedroom brand new unit. She's never had a vacancy, and it's always some friend, so it helps them too, because sometimes they don't get that opportunity to find something new. And so I think she's on her, third or fourth renter going in. It's usually about a year. Yeah.
That is so cool.
Yeah. But yeah, to answer your question, yeah, we've helped several people. And with the SB9, we're helping, gosh, how many friends are we helping with the SB9 now? It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think we've got 6 friends that are in active SB9s or ones that we've gotten through.
That is awesome. Wow. Way to go. How do you view debt and using leverage as a tool for real estate?
I'm very comfortable with debt. I have a lot of friends who want to pay off. They don't want to owe anything. But for me, if I can borrow money, even if it's at 7 to 10%, which some of my older stuff's in the 3 to 4%, but everything I've done in the last few years is in the 7 to 10% range. And as long as I'm doing something with that where I make, a lot more, by doing an ADU or an SB9, it's worth it to me. I can justify that higher interest rate with the equity I create. And so there's a lot of different ways to calculate that equity. But I mean, in some instances, I only have to put 10% down. I pay a little bit more for that. But, if I've only got 100,000 into a $1 million project, and I'm able to create $300,000 in that, in equity in that project within a year, I'm making way more than, the 7 to 10%, so I'm very comfortable with debt, but I understand why people wouldn't be. And so for me, I always have justified debt with, the amount of equity I create with it.
Yeah. Are there equations you use to calculate that, or what are your metrics that you're looking at when analyzing a deal?
I'm pretty rough math. I tend to go off of a worst case scenario. What's the worst thing that can happen? If I fix this house up and I can't sell it, what can I rent it for? And if it rents for that, does it justify the monthly payment? And then how long would I have to hold it until I think I could sell it and get my equity out of it? I've got a property in Avila right now that my plan was to subdivide it and build it, but I've got a larger project in San Luis that's going to keep me busy for a while. So I've decided to sell that off, and it's kind of sitting right now because it needs a little bit of work. It's not terrible, but most people who buy in Avila want something done. And so that's when I can rent it, but I won't be able to rent it for, my monthly on it. So that one I'm looking at, if Avila, if buyers want something a little bit fixed up, nicer, I'm actually thinking about fixing that one up and maybe adding some square footage to kind of justify it.
Mm-hmm.
So I can tell you most of my plans change, at some point in the process. So I might go into something thinking I'm going to do one thing and then completely change gears and do it a different way. But everything I do is kind of what's the worst case scenario, and then it's nice to kind of have that vision of the best case scenario. But as long as your worst case scenario isn't that bad, I think, I kind of buy stuff before I even know what to do with it sometimes. But as long as you can justify it, like the worst case is this, and it still makes sense, then you do it. And then you kind of, dream up all the other things that you can do with it as you go along.
Now, when you're doing all these projects, like, are you the one going in there swinging a hammer or buying the supplies from Home Depot, or like, what's your role like in your projects?
Yeah. So my brother's my plumber and electrician. He's, way better than me at all that stuff. So he's got his hands on a lot of it. I'll help out. I shouldn't say most of it. I can do some of the stuff, but not as well as the guys I pay to do it. But I enjoy, I'll throw down floors every so often. We were under a time crunch, so I put the baseboards down on a project we're working on over the weekend, last weekend. Went to Home Depot this morning because we needed shower curtains for the triplexes we're working on. So I had to go grab those. A lot of times it's, do I want to pay someone to go do this, or do I just do it because I've got the time? And so, and while I was at Home Depot, they reminded me that the carpet for one of the units is there that I needed to pick up. So I picked that up. So I definitely recommend, anybody that wants to do this, I definitely recommend getting your hands dirty a little bit, save that money, at least know, what it takes to do it. You're going to make more money, save more money, but I'm way too busy to do it, and my time is actually better spent looking for the properties and kind of keeping everything moving. But yeah, sometimes I'm standing there and guys are working on stuff and someone needs to run to Depot, and I'm the guy that runs to Depot. So yeah, it's a little bit of both. Yeah. I'll be the guy with the hammer sometimes. Sometimes I'm just the guy on the computer.
Nice. So John, are there any parting words of advice you'd like to share with the people out there who are thinking about taking that leap, but just haven't quite done it yet?
Yeah. Have a lot of conversations. Some people are just going to get upset at you and say, hey, stop talking about this. But I talked about investing in real estate for about a year before I actually did it, to a point where some people just didn't want to talk to me anymore. And the first flipper I bought was a guy that I shared a warehouse space with, or he was in the warehouse next to me. And I was talking to him about it. And he said, you need to just put your money where your mouth is. I'm selling a property. It needs work. You should just buy it from me. And he gave me a good deal. And that was the first one I did. And after that, like it's always scary to do the first one. And then once you do the first one, you go, oh, this isn't so bad. And then you get to a point where it's like, oh yeah, I can do this in my sleep. So I would say, have conversations. We didn't really touch on owner financing. Like, you might end up talking to a parent, one of your parents' friends who has a property and is willing to work with you and wants to help you get into your first house. And so it really helps to just, create a lot of relationships where you're talking about it, because, maybe your ideas change too. I think I have a pretty good grasp on this, but every so often someone will say something, well, yeah, that makes way more sense than what I'm thinking, And so I, don't assume you know everything, just listen to everybody, see what everybody else is thinking, and try to create some relationships where you can get into something, or you've got more ears out there looking for the same thing as you.
Awesome. Wow. Well, that was awesome, John. Thank you for sharing all those great tips. And so to the audience, if you heard that, the next step is just have conversations with people. Start getting out there, meeting other real estate developers, investors, house hackers. And we actually host a monthly neighborhood a get together in San Luis Obispo for real estate investors and developers. And we have conversations just like this where you get to talk to people who are doing real deals in town today. So if you're interested in that, reach out to us. We'd love to get you invited to our next meetup. And as always, thanks so much for tuning in and make it a great day.